Hello, everybody. Welcome to the most recent episode of our podcast, Road to Retail. My name is Tracy Priest, and this is my good friend and colleague, Bruce Montgomery. And welcome.
Hello, everyone.
So, Bruce, this is a little different today. It's just you and I today, no guests. So, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, with no guest today, Tracy, we better be really interesting. So today, we have a topic that I hope appeals to everybody's capitalist instincts. So here's the deal, folks. You got accepted, you've been in a retailer, you're hitting your hurdles, and the retailer and you are both ready to talk about expanding your business there. So, how do you best expand with a retailer where you now already have some brick and mortar presence? So, that's what we're going to cover today. Some things for you to think about, some things maybe to ask for, and some things to watch out for. So Tracy, why don't you kick this off?
Absolutely. So one of the things we want to bring to your attention is slotting. So as Bruce mentioned, you've got a category review or a line review, and you want to introduce some new SKUs to your buyer. One thing you want to clarify is what is the slotting? Are you going to pay slotting like you did the last time in the same amount, or is it going to be different? Many retailers from year to year do increase their costs of doing business with them. So we're not saying it's not negotiable, but I certainly would ask, and if you can negotiate, as we say on our podcast, asking is for free. So you definitely have to take that into account. Make sure that you're looking at when you're doing your cost of goods and your P&L, that you're including your cost of the slotting for your new items. So the other thing you want to also think about is your trade spend. Is your trade spend going to go up? So if you have 3 items in a retailer now and you're going to go to 6, what does that do to your trade spend? Typically, you can amortize your trade spend over now 6 items versus 3. So in effect, your trade spend will go down a little bit, is what we believe. But definitely make sure that you're taking into account as you're looking at your financials before you go into, the buyer's office, that you understand what the financial implications of introducing those new items into this particular retailer. Bruce, anything?
Yeah, so those are both really good points. And as Tracy said, odds of, let's use slotting, odds of slotting being forgiven are extraordinarily low because it's a line item for many buyers that they need to fill and that they're graded against. So understanding how your category manager is evaluated is always critical because you can't be successful if you don't help them be successful. But to Tracy's point, if you had to, I'm going to make numbers up, folks. If you had to pay $10,000 a SKU when you got into this retailer 2 years ago, it might have gone up. They might have cut you a break if they're one of the retailers that is, wants to attract and be known as a home for kind of cool and emerging brands. But at some point, you might be moved from the kid table to the grown-up table, and you're going to pay full boat. If you're doing well enough and you have good innovation, if you wanted to bring in another 3 SKUs, sometimes you can get away with only paying slotting on 2 and you get the third. So to Tracy's point, ask. And then the other thing, which we are always advocates of, is as you get to the end of this meeting and you summarize either before you leave or in your follow-up email, document what you heard, okay? So that there's no hard feelings later of, wait, you said I only had to pay slotting on 2. Okay, right. In the end, it's their real estate, their rules. But once you guys reach an agreement, everyone should live with them at least for a while. Tracy, anything else to add
Yeah,
there?
I want to just Bruce hit on a great point. Make sure after your meeting that within 24 hours, you write a recap to your buyer. Hey, thanks for the meeting. Appreciate you taking your time to see me today. I just wanted to make sure that I captured all of our discussion points. Boom, slotting is $10,000. You're looking for incremental spend. We discussed upping our marketing spend with you, things like that, just so there's no misunderstandings in writing as soon as you can, within 24 hours of your meeting with the buyer.
Exactly. I had a lawyer once who, when we did a contract and got everything done and signed, he said, "I'm glad this is now fossilized." And I was like, "What?" And he said, now the terms are in stone and everyone agreed to them and everyone's signatures here. And I was like, okay, I kind of like that term.
Yes,
So as we move on, you gotta be careful because again, we're going to talk about this in a minute. But one of the keys to being successful is making sure that your scorecard, which is how you're performing, doing boring things like shipping and your paperwork's in order and you're executing your promotions. But when you talk about expanding, it's important for you to not get so excited that you stop thinking logically. So if you were in 200 stores in a retailer, is the better move to take your two SKUs, for example, that are selling well and go from 200 to 500 stores versus go from 200 to 300 stores and add three SKUs? Because a lot of the times when we talk about how the paper will be graded and what success looks like, it's largely on pieces per store per week, dollars per store per week. And the more stores you add across each item is usually evaluated independently, right? So
correct.
we heard from one of the buyers Tracey and I interviewed. He said, I don't sell brands, I sell items. So you may have a very successful brand, but you might have some dog items. And this person said, if you have dog items, the first thing we're talking about is what's in my dog pound that you own. So, is it better to just expand your winning SKUs into more stores? And part and parcel of that is, as a smaller firm, there's always going to be some uncertainty in the buyer's mind as to, can you keep up, right? Can you keep up? Because this is a risk to them. Because if for some reason you can't ship, they look goofy to their manager. Store managers are calling, going, what the heck is going on? So really make sure that your manufacturing supply chain can keep up with this demand as you grow. Because as Tracey and I always say, the only thing a buyer hates more than a product that doesn't sell is one that doesn't ship. So if you want to make enemies fast, start cutting orders. Tracey?
No, that was great, Bruce. Great insight. Things to definitely think about. So the next topic we want to talk about is really a strategic question. And that is, when you want to launch new items into a retailer, do you want to expand into different flavors, maybe a different size? Let's say right now you have an 8 ounce and you want to go to a 16 ounce for those that may want to, pantry load. The other consideration is maybe to introduce a new form. Like if right now you're as an OTC product, you're in a tablet and now you want to go to a gummy. So there's all kinds of things to really think about. But our advice is make sure that whatever you're doing, that one, you can make it and ship it. And two is buyers are really looking today for innovation. So if we were to advise you on this podcast, look at innovation. So again, in that example, if you're in a tablet or a liquid, look at doing some kind of innovation in a gummy, because that's really what the buyer is going to look for. Another flavor, if you've got cherry and berry, and now you want to add lemon, make sure. Another great point is that you have some kind of research or consumer research that says that that's the way to go. So just things to think about. Be very careful that you're not just proliferating SKUs, especially if you're in a big retailer and you have two SKUs and then you go to three. That really does up your risk, and it ups your, the ante with that retailer. So just things to think about. If it was us, we would lead towards, launching some kind of innovation versus another flavor. Bruce, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, those are great points, Tracey. So the thing I would add is, as an old brand manager, I'm guilty of this. So when you think about expanding your brand, people want the billboard. I need a billboard. I got to have, XYZ SKUs and for stopping power. That's not false. However, again, you got to make sure you can sell. And then you think about it this way, folks. Do you expand your line with a line extension, which means the product is the same and the same benefit? So to use an OTC example, it's a cold medicine, right? Or do you go with a flanker product that offers a different benefit? So it might be in a different subcategory. So a sinus allergy or a cough and cold. And another thing, as Tracey talked about, is form. Do you go with a gummy or a liquid gel or a fast dissolve tablet? And then there's the other thing just about the size of the SKU. Do you go with something a smaller, say, tablet or ounce count to give you an opening price point, or do you go to a bigger size to reward heavy users? And something else to think about, as your brand grows, the expectation of the sophistication of your demand plan, which we're going to talk about, those stakes are going to go up as well. Do you have some trial actions going on? You know, you may be a brand where just doing a 20% TPR for a couple of weeks each quarter is sufficient. Other times it's not, but we'll get there in a little bit. So let's move on a second here. We talk about this all the time, and it's very, very important. Tracey and I, when we interviewed retailers, buyers at about a dozen of the largest retailers, we were shocked to hear several of them say many times the brands don't even ask what success looks like. They're just so happy to be told that they're going to be given a shot. They're like high-fiving, you know, doing cartwheels. They're like drinking beer in the parking lot. They're so happy. But you have to understand how the paper is going to be graded. And this gets back to Tracey's point about documenting it in your follow-up email. Is it a certain number of pieces per store per week, dollars per store per week? Are you going to be on, if you get on an end cap, does it change? You know, how what's your velocity rate of sale have to be if they're going to give you some, you know, prime position in, say, Women's Health Month or a healthy eating promotion? But you have to understand how the paper is going to be graded, because if this is not well understood, and it's not a secret, folks, you just have to ask. Sometimes a buyer will put it out there. And this also gets to, do you have a good salesperson or broker or sales agent? We're going to talk about this in a bit too, who knows the account you're working with stone cold. They know by category what the metrics are for success. Tracey?
No, it's so right on, Bruce. You've got to know what success looks like. And again, like Bruce said, that's either dollars per store per week or units per store per week. Those are really the standards that a buyer is going to be evaluating you. It may differ by retailer, but for the most part, those are the two biggest ones. So let's talk about pricing. One thing I want to say right off the bat is you may have an SRP and you can recommend that, but at the end of the day, many of the brands we talk to, you've got to understand that the retailer controls the pricing. They're gonna make sure that they're hitting their margin requirement. Let's say that's 40%, and you come in and say, no, I need to, you know, be at this price point, and that's only a 35% margin. Good luck. You're gonna have a hard time selling that. The second thing is, when you are introducing new items, are they going to be line priced? If you're, like I said in previous, if you're introducing a new flavor, then obviously it is. But if you're introducing a new format, like we talked about, from a tablet or a liquid to a gummy, is that going to be line priced? Sometimes no, sometimes yes. We would advocate that as much as you can, line price everything. So when the consumer gets to the shelf, they don't have to make a decision. Am I willing to pay $1 or $2 more for this new format? They may or may not be. So you've got, that's another time where you have to think about what the risk really is. But we would advocate for line pricing if you can. In some instances you can't. But number one is make sure you understand that that buyer has a margin requirement for their category, and they're pretty much not going to budge off of that. So make sure you understand that the buyer controls the pricing. Bruce?
So something to add on to what Tracey's saying, folks, is if you come out with a new item, and when you look at your internal goals, and because, you know, as the manufacturers, right, we all have margin requirements that we want to make as well. We're not doing this for free, although sometimes it might feel like it. Did I say that out loud? I'm sorry. If you end up with a SKU where you're coming out of your own work and it looks like it's going to be 17 cents more, and you're going to try to translate that into your recommended retail pricing, don't do it. Because when you're not on promo, the retailer may reflect a difference at the shelf, but they'll view that as really poor planning on your part. But here's the big one. When you go to promote your items, they're going to want to put as many items as possible into that ad or promotion, because that's how they justify putting your brand into the ad when they have the internal competition for, digital ads, old school rotos, end caps, et cetera, et cetera. So the first thing they're going to do is buy down that 17-cent premium to line price you with your other items. And guess who's going to eat that? You are. You are. And it's not going to be a discussion point. So the best thing to do is just nail that right out of the chute. The second thing you can do where this becomes helpful is, as time goes on, and if you see your items in a store and you've line priced them to your retailer, and suddenly one of them's like 11 cents higher, again, as Tracey said, they can make the rules, but that opens the door in my book for you to go back to the buyer and say, hey, what's going on? We agreed that the most efficient way to sell this is to line price it, and I see that it's 11 cents higher here. They could say something like, we're doing a pricing test, which is fine. Again, they own the real estate, and sometimes it's someone in their own pricing group just doing something they thought was helpful. And by pointing that out, you can get it adjusted. No promises, but it proves you're watching. And if you're line pricing into that retailer, that gives you a little bit of evidence in your corner to have that phone call and pass the red face test, that it's a legitimate question for you to ask them.
Great point. So one thing I want to add there, Bruce, is again, I know I'm harping on this, but when you're looking at your cost of goods and doing your trade spend and your P&L, make sure you're capturing that cost of buying down that other segment. Like Bruce said, if it's 11 cents, make sure you're capturing that so you're not caught off guard, because that is going to affect your trade spend percentage for sure.
Right. So we already hit on this next point a little bit, so we'll quickly just touch it one more time. Is if you're looking at expanding your brand with a retailer, and you've already kind of crossed the Rubicon that you're going to take more stores with your existing SKUs, but you still might add one anyway because the retailer's asking for it and your performance is strong enough to at least put this on the table. So again, think about what you do. Do you take your winning items and introduce a smaller trial item, or do you introduce a larger item on your winning items? And again, lots of things come into play here. If you have a seasonal brand, there's a little bit of risk of introducing a larger one because you take your consumer out of the market for a longer time. But if you take them out of the market for a longer period of time, one, they've already bought your item, and two, they're not buying your enemy. Okay. Yep. Now, again, it'll come down to, if you ordered this bigger size, can you still make hurdle? If it's dollars per store per week as your metric, you'll have a better chance than if it's pieces, because people naturally will need fewer pieces. If you're a brand that you now have traction, but you're really trying to grow your user base, and maybe it's a bit of a more expensive item, that's when it might make sense to offer that smaller item, so there's less quote unquote out of pocket financial risk for a consumer to consider entering your brand franchise. So again, really think through what expansion is. Is it just stores? Is it a different size on your winning SKUs? Or are you really ready to do a line extension, to Tracey's example, of a different flavor, or a flanker product, which is an incremental or different benefit than your current product? Tracey?
Yeah, one other thing that just I thought of too, Bruce, is when you're looking at line extensions, think about the effect on your contract manufacturer as well, if that's who you're using.
Good point.
Can you get better efficiencies? Will your price on your overall brand come down because you're adding more SKUs? Does that give you a better negotiating tool to say, okay, now I have 3 items, I'm going to have you now make 6. So on my current 3 items, I need you to, make this for 50 cents versus 55. And then this new, and then margin blending, you end up at the end of the day having a much better price with your contract manufacturer, which then adds to your margin and your profitability.
I like that.
Yes, absolutely. So I think we've talked about this a little bit, Bruce, about, really understanding the performance measures and metrics when you're meeting with your buyer. So I think we've kind of talked about that. So do you want to kind of talk a little bit about sales help?
Sure, sure, sure. Thank you. So if you're a smaller emerging or challenger brand, and maybe you're the founder, or you have a super small team, which is good because you're bootstrapping, and you're everything's personal when you're small, right? Because every day literally is life and death. But if you're still handling the sales function yourself or in-house, is that really the best move for your company, right? Because we've had some guests on the show before that talk about one of the biggest errors they've made was that they tried to continue to handle the selling function themselves, or they hired like a friend who really had no selling background. I mean, selling is a skill set, right? And with a lot of these retailers, especially as a small emerging brand, you're not going to get many shots on goal, right? So if you screw something up, that's going to be a huge black mark on your record. The other thing is, even for big brands, unless you have a ton of juice, like a PepsiCo or a J&J, these line reviews and promotional planning meetings, it's once a year, folks. It's once a year. And if you're not in that account all the time and you have a real finger on how is their strategy shifting, how have their personnel changes changed the way this department operates where your item is, really think about one of the other things Tracey and I have learned after doing this show is it's amazing how many people would rather fail for free than pay for skilled sales help, whether that's in-house or through a broker or sales agent. So really think about that, because now that you have traction and you're growing, if you've handled it yourself so far, well done. Is that still something you want to do? Tracey?
Absolutely. So I love that. I love Bruce's analogy, failing for free. My analogy here is you can go further together with a team or with help than you can by yourself. So there's my philosophy lesson for today. So I do definitely think that if you're looking at a specific account, especially in the drug channel, and your bigger retailers like Walmart or a Target, you've got to have an expert to help you with setup. There's so many different portals. There's so many pitfalls in dealing, especially with major retailers. And right now, you may be in a smaller retailer. You might be in a Meijer, you might be in a Wegmans, and those are great regional retailers. But when you get to play with the big boys, you've really got to know what you're doing, or you're going to potentially make some big mistakes that can be really, really costly, especially in the setup. Recently I've been working with a major retailer, and once you get a yes, you have 30 days to get your items and your vendor set up. And if you don't meet that timeline, you're out. So
Yeah.
something really to think about.
When Tracey and I interviewed a buyer from a very large retailer headquartered in Arkansas, he said that they have accepted items and then the item never made it to the shelf because they couldn't figure out how to get set up in the system. So the topic of this show is you're already set up in the system and you're having some success, and we're talking about expanding. But again, now that you're kind of an approved retail or a supplier and you've got a little bit of history that's positive, the buyers are going to be a little less tolerant if you're still really needy. If you're calling their admin and asking, lots of crazy questions, they might be tolerant of that if you're a neat little brand that they're giving a shot, because now that you've had some success, you're also making the buyer look good. But there comes a point where you can't always need help. So that's where bringing in a professional either onto your team or an adjunct through a broker or sales agent that just specializes in XYZ account, it'll more than pay for itself if there's just no errors made, let alone revenue increases. So let's talk about another thing to consider, and it's your marketing spend. Okay, so as you expand with the retailer, kind of like Tracey talked about how slotting, etc., it may be the same, it may change, you got to talk about it. So as you grow, the expectation of your marketing spend is going to grow as well. right? So while the percent may remain, if you were only selling $100 and now you're selling $200, let's say 8%, that 8% is now over a bigger sales base.
Yep.
And they may expect you to participate in some of the more expensive programs. A lot of retailers, from our episode with Larissa Dannenberg, she talked about these retailer media networks. Lots of times brands are being, what's the word, Tracey? Highly encouraged?
Yeah.
Highly
Yeah.
encouraged to
Yeah.
support these in-house retailer media networks. So just understand that the expectation for your marketing spend, and this pressure, folks, it's your national pressure, either across the country or in the region where you have distribution, out against the consumer. And there's the internal commitment to that retailer, also known as trade dollars, trade spend. It's the money you spend on their programs inside their stores or on their e-commerce platform. So be aware, as you have success, you're going to have, expectations are going to go up. And quite frankly, with trade spend, while the rate may stay the same, they'll be a little more hungry for a bigger dollar ticket to be spent. Tracey, what have I missed there?
No, that's perfect. So another cost that you have to take into consideration as you're talking about or thinking about expansion is your DC expansion. So I'll give you a perfect example again, account W in Northwest Arkansas. Let's say right now you're in 500 stores and you're in 10 DCs, let's say, and now all of a sudden you're going to go to 3,000 stores and you're jumping up and down going, oh, this is awesome. But now you're in 27 DCs and shipping to all those. So just make sure that you are accounting for your increase in shipping because you're going to be shipping to a lot more locations. The other thing to think about is if you've got a DC that only has a few stores that are serviced by that DC, do you really want to be in that DC? That's a discussion you'll want to definitely have with your buyer. Don't just say, oh yeah, I'll take 3,000 stores and not think about the repercussions of the cost of shipping to, 2.5 times more DCs. So just
Yeah. Yeah, Tracey, that's an excellent point. And folks, that's again where a broker or sales agent well-versed in that account can help you navigate that, because they'll recognize right away. They'll be like, oh my gosh, Tucson, there's only 2 stores there from that DC, and they'll be able to nuance that discussion of, can we not do Tucson? And you can get out of that. Let's see. Another line item to think about is deductions. Okay. Deductions, as anyone who's been in this business more than 24 hours, deductions are generally a dispute between the supplier and the retailer. And they tend to fall into what I call, 2 buckets. There's execution deductions, like you misshipped, your bill of lading is wrong, you went to the wrong DC, and provided that those are true, it is what it is. Now, sometimes as you get bigger, a retailer will say that the truck never checked in, and actually it did. So that's when you have to have someone who can help you chase down deductions, like our sponsor, Floret. The other kind of deduction are promotional deductions. Like you were supposed to have a tag up in 300 stores and it was only up in 100. So while deductions are always painful because you're wasting, that's not a good word, you're investing time in things that aren't necessarily revenue building, but you're trying to protect revenue bleed out the bottom. But if you go from 300 stores to 1,000, even if your deductions, even if you only have one deduction issue a year, it's over a bigger store base. It's going to be a bigger number. So again, deductions are not sexy. They are very real. And when they pop up, it is a royal pain in the neck. So if you're not well versed in how to handle these, find some help. Again, a sales agent, a broker, or a company like Floret, that this is all they do. But just understand, when you have an issue with a deduction as you grow, the number is going to be bigger.
Absolutely. So 2 things also, great point, Bruce. 2 things to also consider. One is when, and I'm going to go ahead and mention UNFI and KHE. When you add new items, there's a cost to add that item. There's a setup fee. There's also a fee for expansion into DCs. So if you're in 3 DCs now and you go to 5, there's a cost to adding those DCs. So again, make sure that you're taking into account those additional costs of those new items being set up, especially, at those distributors. But like Bruce said, your trade spend is going to go up. And one thing to add to Bruce's comment is you're now shipping more. You're going to be shipping to more DCs. So there'll be more deductions for late fees, you're short, things like that. So your deductions are certainly, going to grow as you expand your distribution.
So, folks, perhaps this show is a little more downbeat than intended because growth is good. And we're psyched that you're getting traction because you're beating the odds by taking a small emerging challenger brand. Not only has it stuck, they're asking you for more, which is great news. But in our zeal for growth at all costs, which is sometimes dangerous, there's just things to think through. So always take a little bit of time to think through what these next moves are. Because if you make a wrong move, you're going to burn up a lot of time you could be spending building your business with your Smokey the Bear hat on fighting fires, which, fighting fires is never as fun as driving growth. But we all know it's just the way it goes, right? So
Exactly.
Tracey, anything to add, or should we roll into the
I
big
just want
finish
to
here?
say we're not trying to be the Grim Reaper here, but we're just trying to help you think through things so that you can grow profitably and not step into landmines. So I think that's really our intention for today's episode.
Absolutely.
All right, so great. Time for the big finish, Bruce. Thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate that. And please follow us on our Spotify and iTunes channel, Road the number 2 Retail, and also on our LinkedIn page. We're definitely trying to increase our followers, so please, we'd really appreciate it. If you have a friend that you think this would be helpful, please encourage them to follow our channels as well. And look forward to our next episode. And thanks, Bruce, for our time today. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, and thank you to our sponsor, Floret. And if you guys are already having some challenges with deductions, I'd suggest you look them up. They can be extraordinarily helpful. Good luck out there.